Myself, I started running around with another really kid from the wrong side of the tracks, and he taught me how to shoplift in the 4th grade. And I got pretty accomplished about it. And the hell of it was that I couldn't enjoy any of my booty, so to speak. I'm not in the modern pirate's booty, so to speak, because I just had to hide it. I couldn't get it out and play with it. My sisters would rat on me. Where did you get the money for that? You don't have that much allowance. So they eventually, you know how sisters are. Raise your hand if you're a brother. You know what I mean. It got back to my parents, and I had this drawer full of stuff that I had taken, and my parents began to realize, after they dealt with that maybe Carl wasn't such a good influence. Maybe they did need to leave him. So unfortunately, they got shunted out of our household after a couple of years, and I often wonder what happened to them. But again, so I personally can really appreciate the situation in the home that has taken in, has made the decision to take in foster children. I think really back then it was probably better than it is today in terms of like what the government gives the families to take care of them. I think that's been cut way back. But the other parts, dealing with the social workers, the guardian ad litems, the judges, the book talks a lot about Kathy Harrison's struggles with that, and just in trying to protect the rights and just the well-being of some of these children. It's, again, some children are just going to slip through the cracks with the system that we have, and I pray that some righteous congressmen we really need to do something and reform the foster care system in this country, and I didn't really know it until I read this book. A little bit of information that I gleaned from the internet just because of this subject was the fact that this blew my mind, just the numbers that kind of breaks your heart to realize there's 400,000 children in the U.S. that are in the system. Wow, that's a lot of abuse and neglect. Yes?
Les and I were foster parents in Wisconsin. Most states are a little different. There they
No.
Oh. Okay. In Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, they interviewed us and put us through a regimen before we became foster parents and interviewed our child too. But one of the foster children that we had for 4 years needed her tonsils removed, and she was on her 12th round of antibiotics before that got approved, which I kept being concerned about. If she was our child, we'd just have those things yanked out, because once tonsils go bad, there's just no point in keeping them in. They can cause all sorts of other problems. And I was worried about what 12 rounds of antibiotics would do to that girl's system, because she was like 11, 12 at that time, or 13, somewhere right along in there. We had her from 11 to 15. And that's an example of the heartaches and the challenges. But they have to get approval from the parents, both parents, and they have to have a judge file something or other to get approval for all of that.
Right, unless you become the adoptive parent, you don't have any right to help take care of the well-being of that foster child. You're right, and I believe that needs to be reformed.
And none of the foster children that we ever had became adoptable to us. 2 of them were infants, and we would have loved to adopt it, especially the little boy. We had him for 6.5 months, and when you have an infant from the hospital, for 6.5 months, they're yours, you know.
Absolutely.
And Les was at the church teaching a class or something the night they came and got him. When the mother decided to take him back, it was the most heartbreaking experience I had. But we've kept in touch with him all these years and became his godparents. Mm-hmm. And christened him later.
I can tell you this, that I can relate to the fact that what you're talking about there, that very real pain when kids like that are wrenched out of what that child believes to be their parent. I knew a couple many years ago very well, and they got a child when the child was 3 or 4 months old, and then by the time it was around 1.5 or almost 2 years old, the parents got their act together, and that's all they have to do is have a clean urine test, have a job, and have a safe and clean home for that child. But many people aren't able to do that for one reason or another, usually addictions. But in any case, they took that child away, and they never got over that. That was so painful to them, that child screaming and crying for my friend, for both the mother and the father. I mean, that's just sad.
Well, they're yours by the time it's 6.5 months.
Well, I can tell you it's a lot shorter than that, because my daughter has, about 2 months ago, took in a 4-month-old, and it's basically already that way now after 8 weeks.
Absolutely.
As a foster child.
And I remember the day that they came to get him. All before that week before, I had said his clothes are not going to leave in a bag. So we bought a suitcase. And I said, I don't know if he's going to be warm for the winter. So here I was wrestling this kid in July, trying snowsuits on him to make sure that he was warm for the winter. You get a little bit mental illness when you...
It pulls on your heartstrings.
Oh yeah, it really pulls on your heartstrings. And to see him cry for me, to give him over to them, and to see him cry for me on the way down the street with the windows open in that car, and the rocking horse that had been in our living room for him to play on, up over the, through the back seat, through the back window, was just heartbreaking to me. And
we have
those kinds of help need to be available to people who are foster parents.
Yes. Thank you, Reverend Pat. I wanted to point out on this other graphic how the fact that shows that most children in the system are non-white. And that's kind of pitiful in my opinion, because, well, actually, maybe that's going to change, hopefully, since our nation's demographic is changing to not so much all white.
I'm not trying to interject negative here, and yet it's... Okay, so I believe in metaphysics, and I believe that the way to change anything is you have to begin to focus on what you want. And I have to say, had I been thinking about fostering, I don't know that I would even think about it anymore after just the last few minutes. It's like
all negative.
I know there's just so much heart.
Well, if you can hold up and have some patience, it's not going to be all negative.
Okay, because it's just that the change that needs to be there is a change in how we all look at it. And the same way with anything, letting go of the horror stories and seeing beautiful stories.
These are real, and this is really happening, and it needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if we button this button, if it'll pull your mic closer to your mouth. So, not to get up close and personal, but
thank you.
But to get up close and personal.
Sounds a little better.
Okay.
Much.
All right, and here in the next slide is about the examples that are abounding in both, which is real, and people who go into foster parenting need to understand that there's going to be frustration, guilt, and worry about it, because, it's just par for the course. There was a specific child named Danny They had to constantly monitor him because he had been abused sexually himself, and he would go fondle other children because that's all he knew. So they eventually had to move Danny out of the house because his behavior just couldn't be under control. But again, to give you more of a, they followed up again, as you said, Pat, that they followed up with this child, and as he grew older, he did become functional. He had to live in a group home, but he got help. So there's a lot of success stories too. And then again, I'm going to go to the dark side again because it's part of my presentation. One of the female foster children that they had been so mercilessly sexually abused by the biological parent that she came to understand that she could use sex as a commodity to manipulate other children and adults. This is again a point where it made me weep when I read about this. It's a tragic outcome of neglect and abuse, and it needs to be stopped. And then the author also obviously holds a great deal of care and compassion for these children. It comes through in her words. And she also voices her uneasiness. She knows that she second guesses herself about the choices that she makes, because literally you have to play God with these children in terms of the decisions. They become pretty much kind of pawns in the game of life here. You know, they have to move on for one reason or another, and you can't help but think, wow, did I do the right thing? Should I have kept them a little longer? Maybe it would have started getting better. You know, it's just kind of par for the course. So you need to have your eyes wide open when you go into this, make a decision like that. But I'm not trying to discourage it, because again, I'm going to jump in a little bit ahead of myself, but I want to make sure I get this in. I have a 14-year-old adoptive grandson. And my grandson came out of a meth-addled family. I can tell you this, I've read his psych eval, and it literally made me cry. I don't think I could be functioning as well as he is. And I know he couldn't be without the love and support that my daughter and my son-in-law have given him. They have 3 other bio children, and yet they decided to take, well, they didn't at that time, but they had 2 whenever my grandson Herschel was brought into the family out of this, again, very, very, I mean, I don't know if you all have ever, I would encourage you just to go to a ceremony, an adoption ceremony, because it's one of the most beautiful experiences you can see. Unfortunately, he and his 3 siblings got split into 3 different households, but that's just how it had to be. And we've kept in touch, and it's worked out. But I can tell you that working with that, you know, the judge, before they did the termination of parental rights, they went to all lengths to try to give his bio parents the chance to clean up their act. And obviously he's always going to love those parents no matter what they do. And you know, it's a tightrope that foster parents have to walk, and they have to make sure that even if the bio parent has engaged, and they have, in really unconscionable behavior after the fact. To give you an example, one of the bio parents accused my daughter and son-in-law of taking out life insurance policies. He posted this on the internet on my grandson with the plans to kill him and collect the money. So that's a kind of like wild stuff. You know, you're dealing with people that have mental illness. So if you understand that, and I work for a behavioral, rural behavioral, and I understand that, but a lot of people, you want to treat some of these people like they're neurotypical, and they're not. So it's really important to keep that in mind.
Clay,
Yes.
one of the things that I found out, if a child has any age much on them, if they know their parent very well, they always yearn to be back with the natural parent.
That's just human
And-
nature.
Yes, it's human nature, and so don't kid yourself that you're going to be a surrogate parent or that you're going to be replacing the parent, because even in adoption, a lot of times it's that way. They still yearn for their parent. And I remember this young girl saying to me, "I want to go home. I want to go back to Mom. Don't you think I can help her?" And I said, "No, Jill, I think you better learn to help yourself. I think that she's already been raised. You need to learn to grow up and
She needs
mature."
to rebuild
Yeah.
the trust that she's lost for you, taking care of you, right?
Yeah,
That's
and
good.
and she was constantly causing Jill to cry and stuff, because she would take, if she had some new fingernail polish, she would say, "Can I have that?" And Jill would give it to her, and so Jill wouldn't have her fingernail polish. She was constantly taking advantage of Jill while she lived in our home
That's
and causing her to cry, but at the same time, that yearn is still there to be back with the natural parent.
Oh, of course it is. Okay, I'm going to go on here with the humor, grace, and love part. They were all examples throughout the book. Kathy Harrison provided opportunities for the kids to know joy and to have someone listen to them and respond to their needs. And a lot of times that was like for the first time for some of these kids. And you'll see that exemplified later with one particular child that I talk about at the end of the presentation. And the author never judged those children, and she understood and accepted the fact that they're innocent and they deserve to be loved, just like all of us. That's one of the things that I love about this church, is that all of the people that I've met so far in this church understand that they have the attitude that people are good and they deserve to be loved, no matter what. No matter what. When Kathy was asked by readers how she tolerates the misery and the hopelessness that's an unavoidable, to your point, Wendy, unavoidable part of fostering abused children, here's how she responded. The people asked her at a book signing or whatever, they said, "How can you cope with these drug addicts and pedophiles and crazy people? Doesn't it scare you?" They all wanted to know that. Wouldn't you rather teach again? She was formerly a teacher, or just sell towels on the internet, like through Etsy or whatever. Etsy, I can't ever pronounce that right. For goodness sake, anything to continue to do what you do. I mean, they're flabbergasted when they hear some of this stuff. And here's her response. "The truth is, there isn't anything I'd rather do. I think keeping a home and raising up children is a good and noble calling. And I say that I'm a foster parent with my head held high. It's hard work and not for the faint of heart. And this, I think, is very true. It is sometimes a job for a warrior." And I tell you what, this woman, I would love to meet her. She is someone that I respect after reading this book. She has a lot of chutzpah and a lot of spine and a lot of love and compassion in her heart. One of the most heartwarming facets of the book, and there were several as I read it, is how, as a reader, I observed the example that was shown by both Kathy and her husband Bruce. They just selflessly gave of their time and resources just to help these people that are vulnerable. And this action inspired their bio children and their adopted children to follow the same kind of altruistic path with the choices they've made with their life and going into the different fields that they've gone into. And that was pretty cool, I thought. Okay. Now this next slide is about how insight and empathy influence the lives of children that many in our society have just written off. Because I don't know about you, but I have definitely, raise your hand if you've ever heard the phrase said about a kid, "Oh, they're never gonna straighten out. Some pups just don't turn out." It's just rampant, you know. It's so easy to do, just to write them off and say they're never gonna. They don't have any kind of potential. When asked what role her For example, her husband Bruce plays in these kids' lives. Kathy said, Bruce feels really strongly that he is often the only normal guy. I mean, I hate to say, normal, because normal's kind of not a word that's popular anymore, but you know what I mean, non-abusive, non-neglectful guy that my little girls and my adolescent girls ever see, Kathy's point of view. He's so good with them. He says, I'm the only book that they're going to read on what a guy should be like. Let that sink in a little bit. Bruce feels that it's important for the girls to see a man who can be patient and kind and nurturing. Even if he and I get annoyed with the kids, we rarely lose our tempers. We're both pretty good at realizing, this is pivotal, that children use behaviors to express their feelings. Many of us look at children as if they're just little adults. They're not. They behave totally differently. If you ever get a chance, take a class in child psychology. It's eye-opening. So you can't take things personally with the way a kid acts out. If you do, you're just basically going to be spinning your wheels. And when she was asked there's a question and answer, reader's questioning the author at the end of the book. And they asked her, why did you write this book? And she stated this, that foster parents are and I believe this, they're the most misunderstood people in the world. There seems to be a mental picture of foster parents. And this is a stereotype I think a lot of us carry. We're either selfless saints or leeches on society that just take in children and suck in the government money and then feed them macaroni and cheese and lock them up in the closet. I'm afraid there's a lot of legislators in this country that have that attitude. A lot of them with not just children, not just foster parents, but with people who really need Medicaid, for example. Truth is, I'm not a saint. I can get impatient. I don't always make the right choices. Sometimes I just want to go in my bedroom and lock the door. But I'm also not cruel and awful. In this book, I wanted to offer a more authentic and realistic public image of people who choose to do foster care. And in my mind, she succeeded in spades doing that. Just did a fabulous job of giving that portrayal, opening up people's eyes. Okay, how much time do I have?
Plenty.
We have
Plenty of time?
20 minutes.
20 minutes? Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my conclusion and then open it up for comments and questions. Just so you know, I actually invited Holly Madden. I don't know if you all know who she is. She's the associate pastor over at, I knew she couldn't come because she has Connecting Grounds duties. She's the associate pastor at Connecting Grounds. And also the person that built up and I don't know if you all are aware of this or not, but Family Connections, this is kind of a corollary because Family Connections project over at Connecting Grounds is a project in which people can, and I'm one of the volunteers. I've had to step out for a medical leave for a while, but I'm going back to it next week. You go and you get trained to be a person who can oversee, or you just sit back in the grass and listen. But whenever a parent who's had their child removed from their custody and put in a foster situation, you can oversee and supervise visitation once a week for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And you just make observations, and your observations go back to the caseworker and the judge. And sorry, I get a little bit emotional because I think about reunification. It's really an important thing to me. Pat, you're talking about children that need their bio parents. They really need it if it's at all possible. It's in my heart to try to make that happen. And in any case, I invited her to come here because she referred this book to me, along with some other books too, about fostering. She's got a heart as big as Texas for this issue, and she really supported me for doing this presentation about foster care. They're always doing, as a volunteer, you're always getting education, and she just does a slam bang job with leading. She's right up there in the Sue category of leadership. That kind of caliber. So in conclusion, I'd like to relate a story from a book that really touched me deeply. And here's the story in Kathy's words. There's this image of kids in foster care, that they're all hideous delinquents. And instead, so many of them are remarkable. They have sweet streaks. Even the worst kids have sweet streaks. I had a horrible child. Difficult as can be. Retarded, very aggressive and violent, sneaky, and sometimes really mean. A hard kid, I thought. What have I gotten myself into? But when she came into the house, she looked around and said, "My God, this is like living in a party." Just like that, as soon as her attitude changed, my attitude changed. There are moments that are quite sweet. And underneath it all, kids are just kids. Again, as I said, the book was recommended to me by Holly Madden. And a couple of the reasons why I have, again, I'll repeat this, a heart for foster children are because my oldest daughter has the 14-year-old. He's been adopted in our family for 7 years now. And for me, the term adoptive, he's my real grandson as far as I'm concerned. But he's had his issues, but we've battled on through it, and I just give all the credit to his parents. My daughter and her husband have gone to great lengths to help him, and he's done so well. He's become very successful now. He plays the cello, he plays football and basketball. Not so good at basketball, but a lot better at football. But and also, we can't even put his picture up on social media yet, of course, because my youngest daughter had struggled. She has one bio child that's in the second grade. I get mixed up. There's so damn many of them. But anyway, they had been praying to get a foster child because they had been unable to have another bio child, and they had a heart to have a second child. And that came true, and it's been real interesting. There's been situations where, like the bio mother has, in the last couple of months, she left rehab after 3 days. She's gotten a DUI. She doesn't show up for any of the visitations. She's down to like 1 visitation a week now. And now she's pregnant again. So that puts a whole nother. It was so interesting because she was trying to get kinship placement with, I didn't even know this was a thing. A person, you can get a kinship placement if the child's been taken out of your custody. You can apply for it anyway, even if they're not kin to you. If you've known them for, I think, at least 8 years. and she knows this lady, the bio mom does, it's been, it's 60-some years old. Yes.
So you can get kinship placements from a variety of reasons. Sometimes we utilize kinship placements with school teachers. Sometimes it was someone that, a family that a child might have met at church. The kinship is a really loose word, but basically it means that you are known to the child and can pass a background check.
Right.
So.
That's the thing, and this person did pass the background check, I believe, but now she has second thoughts because the bio mom has another baby on the way, so she's like, I didn't sign up for more than one baby, more than one, so obviously the caseworker, what do you think the caseworker, she said to my daughter, oh, then are you willing to take this second child into your home? And they immediately said yes.
It's definitely a tough thing because it's policy. It's state policy to place siblings together whenever possible. But if you have a sibling group that has come into care and they're in a home and mom has had another baby, that first home will always be the first one asked, would you be interested in taking the baby? And if not, they'll look for another home, for the new infant. And then the foster parents are encouraged to create sibling visits. And
thank you.
yes, and one of the things that I didn't share when I did my intro is that when my oldest son was in high school, one of his good friends, the parents got transferred, and it created a crisis in their home life, and we ended up taking in a young man, and we got him for his last 2 years of high school. He graduated in 2011. He's still mine. He still comes home for Christmas. I still hear from him on Mother's Day, and it's a lifelong commitment. And this weekend, I got a text from my youngest two children because their foster brother was visiting them in Denver, and he was there with them. And I love that because ostensibly we were done with him in 2011, and the truth is, no, he's one of our family, and he still is with the children as well, and with my extended family. He's still, my parents are his grandparents, and it's a really special thing. So I want you to know that it can be wonderful, it can be challenging. For every horror story, I know that there are wonderful stories. And if I have time, since you seem a little ahead, I want to share a story about a wonderful foster adoptive family, and they took in an infant. They tried very hard to continue contact with the extended family. They were letting grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins visit. They obviously wanted the parents to visit, but the parents were not being very successful with recovery. But these foster parents tried really, really hard, and unfortunately things didn't quite work out. But the case moved to adoption, and these two mothers were able to adopt this child, and they were just such extraordinary humans. The day of the adoption, the weather was just really bad, and when they were driving home from the court, they saw a woman walking on the side of the road in the rain, and they stopped to pick her up to give her a ride, and it turned out to be the biological mother. So, like, the synchronicity of that. So just an unusual thing, but they were able to give the bio mom a ride. She was able to hug on her baby, and the bio mom that they picked up was just really grateful to know that this was the family, that the kind of people that her child was going to grow up with. Does anybody have questions about foster care? We could take turns answering.
Well, I'd like to read this last little bit about. It is my hope that by listening to this presentation that it would possibly inspire the listener to think about sharing his or her family by taking in a foster child. I'd wager that the experience will be gratifying and meaningful. And underneath it all, again, I want to underline this: kids are just kids. And I really appreciate you sharing that story because there was a very similar one in the book where actually the mom thanked Kathy for taking the child.
Yes.
You realize the courage and just the care and love that person had, knowing and accepting that they couldn't do what they needed to do for that child and were willing to turn it over to someone who could.
Absolutely. Not every child that comes into foster care comes in because they're taken. Sometimes they come into foster care because they've been relinquished to care in order to protect the children. Yes, Pat? Oh, sorry. Here, let me bring that microphone to you.
I wanted to mention that one of the keys, if you have a little bit older child, is to find their skill, their talents, and bring them out. With Jill, she was placed in our home. Her older sister was in a group home, and Jill was the same age. Our daughter was the same age as Jill's older sister, and they picked our home because they felt like Melody would be a good example for Jill to follow. And we found out that Jill had a talent for art. We gave her private art lessons, and she just blossomed. She was 2 years behind in school when she came to us, and with Melody and Les and I, all three to help her with homework and stuff, she achieved, honor roll by the time she left at 15. So there's so much, if you find their talents, that'll undo a lot of other things for them, help them in school, help them with friends, help them in the home. And I credit Melody a lot for being such a good sister. And the reason I initially went into foster care was that my daughter had grown up alone, and she didn't know what it was like to have siblings. And so she would go to a friend's house and come home and say, "Why does Ashley hit Todd? Can't we all play together?" Because the older sister, her age, would hit the little brother who tried to come play with them. And Melody didn't understand, and I was afraid she might grow up and have multiple siblings and not understand their dynamics. So that's one of the reasons I went into foster care, and it worked all the way around for Jill, for Melody, for all of the other children that we fostered. And it is a wonderful experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and I've thought a lot about, because we have a 4-bedroom home and there are only the two of us, about doing it again. But at the same time, it takes a lot of thought, and we're at a different age now than we were then, and don't have Melody to be a blessing.
Thanks for
They
sharing.
also looked a lot alike, so much so, my foster daughter and my bio daughter looked so much alike that clerks in stores thought they were sisters and were surprised to find out they were foster sisters.
Wow.
So that probably was an interesting dynamic too.
So even if you are not, you don't think, maybe I don't want to commit to a year-round situation, there are a lot of ways that you can get involved with foster care without having them 24/7. There are a couple of different types of foster homes. There are people that have their homes licensed for emergency foster care placement. It's for when the children are first coming into care. Those homes usually are the ones that get the kids the dirtiest. They're the ones getting them to their first doctor's appointments after they come into care, baths and getting them fed, and trying to get them a little bit stabilized until we can find the home for them. So that's emergency foster care placement. There's also something called respite care. And respite homes are homes that are licensed. The families do the background checks, the homes are licensed. And when the foster parents need a break, and I feel like foster parents should always use their respite care hours, the children or child will go stay with the respite person. And so the respite person does not have to be a trained foster parent. The respite person can possibly be someone's sister or someone's aunt or the grandparent. And they get paid while they've got the respite care happening, but the foster parents get a break. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I believe that she touched on that in the book about the respite thing, which is clearly that's a lot of pressure sometimes, and there's a lot of, the thing that I got most out of this book was hope. I got the feeling that these children are going to get a chance. And I also wanted to mention one other important program, which is called the CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate. That's another way you can get involved. My mom did it, and it was very gratifying for her. It's where you actually are appointed by the court. You go through some training, and it's volunteer, but you get assigned to a child, and you look out for their interests. You go and have visitations with them, and you make sure that the parent is getting their, doing what they're supposed to be doing, and these kids need to have somebody looking after them.
So my favorite part about CASA, and then I'll bring the microphone to you, Pat. My favorite thing about CASA is that when children come into care and they're assigned to CASA, the CASA's only case is that one family. And they will visit the children twice a month. They come to team meetings. They get a chance to work with the guardian ad litem. They come to court. They talk to the case managers. So I have been on cases where when we get from the day it starts to the day of adoption, that the CASA worker and I as the guardian ad litem were the only two people who had been on the case the entire time, because there had been turnovers of juvenile officers, there had been turnovers of case managers, and so having a CASA is it's so important. And the children that have CASAs appointed to their case achieve permanency significantly faster than the children that do not have CASA advocates.
It just makes sense.
I just wanted to mention, I don't know what the category is, maybe you know, and we were in Wisconsin, and this is Missouri, but we had one child for 2 weeks until her adoption date, about 2.5 weeks till her adoption date. It was already set in place, and we got her right from the hospital. And she was with us the first 2.5 weeks of her life, and we still keep in touch with her. She's married now with a child, and came to his 25th anniversary of his ordination and spoke. She's part Indian, and just an absolutely delightful person with a delightful family. But her parents, her adoptive parents, were so grateful to us for taking care of her the first 2.5 weeks of our life that they've stayed in touch.
Wow.
The father is now deceased, but they've stayed in touch all this time with,
So something
which was in the
that
70s.
so, that's a wonderful example of something you don't really have to go to a lot of effort and work. You just got to care. You just have to have a caring and compassionate heart. I know there's also speaking of just adoptions and whatnot, my nephew was adopted by my sister, who was never able to have any children. And they've always had an open, the bio mom has always come to had a connection with him, and he's always known that he's adopted. It was just one of those things where people can have the care and compassion and think about that child more than themselves. Because I'm afraid in a lot of cases people have a tendency to they want to control things, like, don't want this child to know about their adoption or about their bio parents. It's healthier to know. So the truth is always the way to go, I feel like.
And there's a lot of ways to create family in situations where children will have a better life and a better chance. In our family, we had a young teenage girl who came from a very, very, very abusive family. Much more so, it was just my father, and there wasn't abuse when he left. But she came into our lives and had a child, and my sister took her in, and then she had her second child, and she was like, I don't want this child. and we had friends that couldn't have children, and they adopted this little girl. And then she just kept getting pregnant and having babies, and she would go, I don't want this one. Does it